In the middle of the Cold War, when the world stood divided by walls of concrete and fear, the United States government quietly did something that sounded less like espionage and more like science fiction. They stole the sky, not metaphorically, not diplomatically, they stole it piece by piece from the edge of space. In 1959, long before spy satellites streamed live images to analysts in Virginia, American intelligence faced a terrifying blind spot. The Soviet Union had tested its first hydrogen bomb, it had launched Sputnik, and Washington had one burning question: how many missiles does Moscow really have? The answer would determine whether the United States slept at night or prepared. For annihilation, the CIA's solution was audacious. If they couldn't see inside the Soviet Union from the ground, they would look from above, higher than any fighter jet, higher than any commercial aircraft, so high that Soviet radar would struggle to track it. The aircraft was called the U-2, designed by the legendary engineer Kelly Johnson at Lockheed's secretive Skunk Works. It looked fragile, long glider-like wings stretching across the sky like a mechanical albatross, but it could fly above 70,000 feet. At that altitude, pilots wore pressure suits that made them look like astronauts before astronauts were famous. At first, the U-2 seemed invincible. It soared over Soviet territory, photographing missile sites, airfields, and nuclear facilities. The CIA learned something astonishing. The feared missile gap might not be real. The Soviet arsenal was formidable, but not the unstoppable wave many American politicians had warned about. But the sky was not as safe as it seemed. On May 1, 1960, a U-2 piloted by Francis Gary Powers took off from Pakistan on what was supposed to be another routine reconnaissance mission. It would become one of the most explosive intelligence failures of the Cold War. High above Soviet territory, a surface-to-air missile detonated near the aircraft. Powers parachuted down, captured alive. Washington initially claimed it was a weather plane that had strayed off course. Moscow responded with a cold smile and produced the pilot. The embarrassment was global. A planned summit between President Dwight D. Eisenhower and Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev collapsed. Trust evaporated. The Cold War grew colder, but here is the twist few people talk about. The U-2 disaster didn't end high-altitude spying. It accelerated something far more secretive. Buried inside classified files, only fully declassified decades later, was a mission so bold it almost defies belief. It was called Project Azorian. By the early 1970s, the Cold War had shifted from the sky to the sea. In 1968, a Soviet submarine, K-129, sank mysteriously in the Pacific Ocean, thousands of miles northwest of Hawaii. The submarine carried nuclear missiles. It also carried something even more valuable: Soviet encryption codes and intelligence secrets. The CIA saw an opportunity. If they could retrieve the wreckage from nearly 3 miles below the ocean's surface, they could unlock Soviet naval communications. There was just one problem: no one had ever attempted to lift an object of that size from such depth. Not a warship, not a submarine, not anything. The ocean floor is not a gentle resting place. At 16,500 feet below the surface, pressure is crushing literally. Steel groans, equipment fractures, darkness is absolute. The CIA's solution was as theatrical as it was brilliant. They partnered with the eccentric billionaire Howard Hughes. Publicly, Hughes announced he was building a massive deep-sea mining vessel to harvest manganese nodules from the ocean floor. It sounded like futuristic industry. The press barely blinked. In reality, the ship, called the Hughes Glomar Explorer, was a floating lie. Hidden inside was a massive claw-like retrieval device designed to descend to the seabed, grip the shattered Soviet submarine, and lift it into a concealed internal bay, all without the Soviet Union knowing. Imagine the audacity: a 6,300-ton ship hovering above the wreckage of a nuclear-armed submarine, conducting one of the most expensive covert operations in history, all while pretending to mine rocks. In 1974, the mission began. For weeks, the Glomar Explorer lowered its mechanical claw into the abyss. The world above went about its business, unaware that miles beneath the Pacific, a Cold War gamble was unfolding. Then came the moment of truth. The claw latched onto the submarine's remains. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, it began to lift. Metal strained. Engineers monitored every vibration. Billions of dollars in global credibility hung in the balance. Halfway up, disaster struck. Part of the submarine broke apart and plunged back into the darkness below. Silence filled the control rooms. After years of planning, after unprecedented engineering feats, much of the prize was gone lost again to the sea, but not all of it. The CIA successfully recovered a portion of the wreckage. Accounts differ on exactly what was retrieved. Much remains classified even today, but it included nuclear torpedoes and reportedly bodies of Soviet sailors who were later buried at sea with military honors. Decades later, the United States quietly handed footage of that burial to Russia as a gesture of respect. And here's another twist: the Soviets had suspected something. Soviet ships reportedly observed the Glomar explorer during the mission, but without proof, they couldn't act without escalating tensions dramatically. It became a strange standoff, too. Superpowers staring at each other across international waters, each pretending not to understand what the other was really doing. For years, the mission remained secret. When journalists finally uncovered hints of it in 1975, the CIA gave a now famous response to Freedom of Information requests. They said they could neither confirm nor deny the existence of the operation. That phrase became known as the Glomar response. It entered the legal and intelligence lexicon, a bureaucratic sentence born from one of the boldest covert missions ever attempted. Think about that for a moment. An entire ship built as a cover story, a billionaire used as camouflage, a mechanical claw reaching into the crushing darkness, a submarine lifted from a graveyard 3 miles down, and a phrase neither confirm nor deny that would echo through decades of secrecy. Project Azorian cost hundreds of millions of dollars in 1970s money, billions by today's standards. Some critics called it reckless, others called it genius, but it revealed something essential about the Cold War mindset, the belief that information was worth almost any risk. It also exposed a deeper truth: for all the spy gadgets and covert heroics, intelligence work is often a gamble. Sometimes you win everything. Sometimes half your prize slips through your fingers and vanishes forever into black water. And sometimes the real victory isn't what you retrieve, but what the world never realizes you attempted. Today, satellites orbit silently overhead. Submarines patrol unseen depths. Cyber warfare hums through invisible networks. Compared to that, a giant claw lifting a submarine might sound almost quaint, but in its time it was astonishing. It was a mission born from fear, engineered through deception, and executed with breathtaking nerve. A story so improbable that, had it failed spectacularly in public view, it might have triggered a crisis no one could control. Instead, it became one of the CIA's most extraordinary declassified secrets, a reminder that history is not just written in speeches and summits, but in shadows, in steel cables stretching into the abyss, in silence, and sometimes in the simple, chilling words, "We can neither confirm nor deny."